How's that, Dan? Thanks for waking me up here. My mic was switched off. Um, Barbecue Mike, Larry Wheeler. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Sorry about the microphone there, folks. Barbecue Mike, I think I've got it fixed. Are you hearing me over there on YouTube? Dan's getting us on Facebook. Let me know, Mike, if the sound is fixed. The mic was switched off. I got it switched on. Okay, Barbecue Mike says sound is good over on YouTube. All right, we're in business. Well, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for coming down. I thought this month or this broadcast, we would talk about everybody's favorite barbecue food, and that's ribs. Probably a lot of you are really expert at ribs, but probably there's a lot of you who aren't, and maybe there's a few tricks I know that I can share with you guys and get you up to speed, get you ramped up. I don't know about you guys, but to me, Thanksgiving is turkey, and Easter is ham, Christmas is beef roasts, and 4th of July is ribs. It's a ribs holiday around here. We usually have about 40, 50 people come over, and I cook up a mess of ribs, and it's a big hit. And everybody just loves eating with their fingers and loves that sweet, sour barbecue sauce. And the porkiness wonder of ribs, as the song goes. Before we get started, I just happened to be snacking on something earlier, and I thought I'd share it with you. I don't know how many of you have ever had, it's really hard to see, cream of pistachio. I bought this on Amazon. You can also get a version of it on Milk Street and other places. This is my favorite. It's by Vincente. It's like peanut butter, only it's pistachio butter. It's a little sweet, and oh my, is it marvelous. Let's see if you can see in there. It's kind of green and thick, and it's not runny, like peanut butter. If you like pistachios, and even if you don't normally, I wish the label would show better. But it's Vincente, Vincente, cream of pistachio on Amazon. Not cheap, but it is just mind-blowingly good. I love this stuff. Something else that I had with dinner tonight, we had pasta with a tomato sauce and a salad on the side. And I dressed my salad with a vinegar made of oranges. That I buy over on milkstreet.com. And it is just essence of orange, really concentrated orange zest flavor, very tart, with fresh olive oil. As long as I'm sharing about some of my favorite ingredients, we belong to the olive oil club. I forget the exact name of it. But they send us 3 bottles, small bottles, of olive oil 4 times a year from whatever's in season. The 3 we just got in last week were from Chile. Oh my, are they marvelous. True extra virgin olive oils. I got to tell you, there's really good evidence that if you've been buying extra virgin olive oil in the grocery or elsewhere, you're not getting extra virgin. It's really easy to fraudulently label this stuff. Really true extra virgin olive oil is hard to find. And once you smell it and taste it, it's mind-blowingly better than anything you've ever had. This olive oil club, if you're interested, drop me a note, meathead@amazingribs.com. I'll send you connection information. But it's just brilliant stuff. Okay, enough product news. Um, I wanted to touch on ribs and pork ribs in particular. We'll talk about beef ribs in a minute, and then the as usual the way these things work if you're not used to it. I usually start off with a little bit of a monologue talking about a topic of interest, and then we throw it open to whatever you want to discuss, whatever questions you have on your mind. So be thinking about whatever you want to hit me with. But let's talk about ribs. Let's start with pork ribs. I think you know that there's pretty much 4 cuts of meat from the hog that are labeled ribs. There's back ribs or baby back ribs. There's spare ribs or side ribs. There's St. Louis cut. There's rib tips. And then if you want, we can add a 5th, and that's country ribs, which aren't really ribs at all. And we'll get to that in a minute. If you think about your rib cage, it's analogous to the hog's rib cage. The bones that are attached to the spine lie just beneath a long muscle that runs from the shoulder to the hip. And if you think about your back or the back of someone you're friendly with, you can see that long muscle that runs along the spine. And just beneath them is where the rib cage is. That long muscle is the longissimus dorsi, the long dorsal muscle. Duh. And that's the muscle from which the ribeye steak comes, from which the further down towards the hips, the strip steak comes from. And it's considered by many to be the best tasting muscle on the animal. On hogs, it's very, very lean, but on beef, it's well marbled and it's marvelous flavor. That's your ribeye or your rib roast comes from that muscle. Excuse me. The ribs just running below them are curved. They're kind of hockey stick shaped. And as they wrap around towards the side, they're cut off, and those are your baby back ribs. And they have meat both between the bones and on top of the bones. The meat on top of the bones is cut from the longissimus. So if you want to have some fun, you can order a pork rib roast or a crown roast, which is when you take that rib roast, long tube, rib bones attached, curved bones, you can make like a donut out of it, and that's your crown rib roast. You can order a rib roast, which has the longissimus and the baby backs attached, but you can cut the baby backs off. So then you have this long tubular muscle, which you can roast as a big roast, or you can cut it into pork chops of whatever thickness you want. That's your standard pork chop from that muscle. And if you cut the back ribs off, you can choose to leave more meat attached. And this is cool. Now you can have baby backs with more meat on it. People love that meat. They love those ribs. So that's something you can do to have some fun and make your back ribs more delicious. And I think back ribs are everybody's most favorite because they have the most meat. However, once you go past where the back ribs end, and they end just about where the armpit is, I don't know if you can see me here, the rib that runs around the chest is called the spare ribs. And they have a section of cartilage across the chest. There's no real bones in there. It's like little preternatural bones. They're little tubes of cartilage. And those are the rib tips. And some people really love them, and some people think they're scrap. But if you cut the rib tips off, you end up with this rectangular shape of side ribs, or I call them the choice. They're my favorite. They're often called the St. Louis cut, or I call them the center cut, because they come from the center. They run from where the baby backs end, around where the armpits are, to just about where the chest begins. And they tend to be straight. The baby backs are curved. They tend to be a little thicker and flat. And there's not much meat on top of them. What lies on top of them is the belly, and that's where the bacon comes from. And they're fattier, and the meat is mostly between the bones, not on top of the bones. And those are my favorite because they're fattier, and that makes them juicier. Now, I've heard people go to barbecue restaurants and say, I didn't really like the ribs. They were very fatty. Oh, my. That's what you're looking for, is rich, fatty meat, because fat is flavor. So those side ribs, or the St. Louis cut ribs, or the center cut ribs, I call them, flat bones. The slab is rectangular shape, and most of the meat is between the bones, not on top of the bones. And that's a really nice cut. It's a heavier cut, and it takes longer to cook. The back ribs, I like to cook them at 225, and they take 3 to 4 hours to cook. Side ribs, or center cut, St. Louis cut, they take 5 to 6 hours to cook at 225. And then there's the rib tips, which you can, if you get spare ribs with the rib tips on, you can leave them on and cook them, or you can cut them off and save them for later. A lot of people like to make stew out of it, or you can just throw them on the grill alongside of your ribs and cook them that way. They'll cook faster, and some people chop them up. Ooh, that reminds me. Let me stick with me here. Not real good at these multimedia shows here, but let's see if I can show you something cool on that topic. I got to go to my YouTube channel and find the video on Yep, there it is. Okay. I'm going to try a screen share. I'm never quite sure how to do this. There we go. I don't know if you can see what happened. No. Stop it. God, YouTube. Stand with me. You're getting a damn commercial. Okay, skip ads. And we got to go back here. And here we go. Okay. Those are rib tips. Watch this guy with his cleaver. Wow. Can you see that? That's at Lem's Barbecue on the south side of Chicago. He's chopping up the rib tips. And boy, are they beloved on the south side of Chicago. Let's see if we can run that again. I don't know. Somebody tell me if you can. I never know what's going out there. Can you see them? Let's see. Roll down here. Look at that. Man, he's flipping that sleever. Those are rib tips. That is funny. Okay, let's go back live. Here we go. Were you able to see that? Somebody, okay, Larry Gonzalez says, I saw. We can see your screen shares. Okay, that's cool. Not real popular everywhere. It's a very cheap cut, but they're really tasty. There's a lot of fat. There's a lot of juiciness in them. Mark says he may be making finger food. Really. So those are rib tips. Now, I like to treat all of them pretty much the same way. I start out and I turn them so that the concave side is facing up. And I take a regular old butter knife and stick it under the membrane. That's the pleura. You have it too. The pleura is a membrane that wraps around the inside of the rib cage and contains your vital organs, keeps them from falling out. And that membrane can get tough when you cook it, or sometimes it can get very rubbery. So I like to remove it, and you get a little flat butter knife between a bone and the membrane, and then you stick your finger in there, and usually you can pull it all off in one pull. Sometimes it takes a couple of pulls, and you get it all off. And if there's excess fat that you don't want, you can scrape that off or cut it off, flip it over, same thing. If you see big old globs of fat that you don't want, you can pull it off. Although a lot of it renders out. A lot of it melts during the cooking process. Then you want to put down your salt and your seasonings. Now, on AmazingRibs.com, all our rubs have no salt in them. And if you follow our recipes, there's a good reason. If you're doing ribs, you need less salt because salt will penetrate deep. But if you're doing, say, pulled pork, which is a shoulder or a pork butt, and it can be big like a bowling ball, it can be quite thick, you need more salt because salt penetrates. It takes time, but salt will go deep, and it's the magic rock. Salt will help the protein hold on to moisture, and it will amplify flavor. All the other seasonings, the paprika, the garlic, the sugar, they don't penetrate. They sit only on the surface. So you apply it based on how much surface area is. So all the recipes on AmazingRibs.com have no salt in them. You apply the salt based on how thick it is and how much it weighs, and you apply the rest of the seasonings based on the surface area. I use the analogy, it's like you can control the speed of the car by using both the accelerator and the brake, and you use them separately. Well, the same thing with salt and your other spices. But if you buy a rub, there we go. Here. This is my commercial rub, the pork rub. It's got salt in it, and that's because every commercial rub has salt in it. Most people don't understand that which I described to you now, that salt and seasonings behave differently and should be applied differently, and for years, rubs have always had salt in them. So if you buy a rub, there's 99% chance it has salt in it. So the solution there is you apply it a couple hours early, so it has time to penetrate. The rest of the stuff will sit on the surface, but you want to get that salt on there so it gets down deep into the meat, so it penetrates, so it helps hold on to moisture. Okay, so you put the rub on, and then I cook it at 225. Now, I have smokers, but if you don't have a smoker, you can do this on a good old-fashioned gas grill or a charcoal grill. You can put the ribs on the indirect side. You divide the grill in two parts. You have a side that has flame under it or a charcoal grill glowing, and a side that doesn't. And you put the ribs on the indirect side. So it's just warming gently with convection airflow. And it'll take 3 to 4 hours for baby backs, 5 to 6 hours. And the trick to testing it is you pick it up with a pair of tongs and you bounce it. And if it cracks, it's probably done. Now, I know I preach thermometers, and I want you to depend on thermometers for 99% of the things you cook, because temperature is the most important factor. And you want them in the 190 to 205 degree range. But it's very hard to get a thermometer probe into the center of the meat in between those bones. So we do the bounce test and the cracking test to see how they're doing. Now, we're not ready to put any sauce on. We don't put the sauce on until it's almost done, until you pick it up and it cracks and you say, okay, it's ready. Then you put the sauce on. And, there's so many different types of sauces out there. You got mustard sauces, you got vinegar sauces, but most of us go for what is known as the Kansas City style sauce. This is our KC barbecue sauce. It's a red sauce, and it's sweet. It's got molasses in it. It's got all kinds of richness in it, and that's really great on ribs. And 1 or 2 coats is all you need. Don't hide the meat with too much sauce. I know everybody loves the sauce. 1 or 2 coats is all you need. And when I'm doing this, I use my smoker to cook the ribs. But at the end, when it's time to sauce it, I fire up my gas grill. I put the sauce on while it's still on the smoker, 1 or 2 coats, leave it on there for about 10, 15 minutes so the sauce sets. And then I take it and bring it over to my gas grill where it's really hot. Lift the lid, leave the lid up, put it face down right over the hot part of the grill, and caramelize the sauce until it's bubbly and sizzly and maybe a little bit of char. Flip it over, do the same thing on the other side, and we're done. And for a big crowd, if I'm just having some company over, I might put a half a slab in front of everybody. That's a lot, really. Most people can't eat a whole half slab, but I'll, maybe put a third to a half a slab, depending on the hunger level. But for a big crowd like this, I cut them into individual bones. And the best way to do that is to lay them face down or concave side up. And then you can really see where the bones are, and you can cut them. Now, it kind of messes up the appearance of the shiny side. So after you get them all cut up, I flip them over, and then I might give them a light coat of sauce just so they look nice and shiny. And that's how I do pork ribs. Pretty straightforward and simple. Of course, there's detail on AmazingRibs.com and in my book, Meathead, which you can see over my shoulder there. And if you have questions, you can always pop one in the mail to us, or just go to AmazingRibs.com and post your question there. Now, I mentioned this other kind of rib, the country rib. They're really not ribs. They're more pork chops. They may have a rib bone. They come from where the rib cage meets the shoulder. And now the pork shoulder, the butt area here, is a big old knotty mass. And that's where you make your best pulled pork. You take that shoulder and you smoke it for 6 to 8 hours. Or you can roast it. Or you can put it in a crock pot. But it gets really tender and cooked low and slow for a long time. There may be a rib bone there. But that country ribs, the way they're cut, they're not the same as the real ribs. And if you look at them closely, they look like a pork chop. And that's the best way to cook them. You can just grill them instead of low and slow smoke them. You can grill them and take them up to about 140, 145. Remember, your back ribs, your side ribs, your spare ribs, you're taking them 190 to 205. But these guys, they're pork chops. And pork chops are best at around 140. And they're going to be a little pink in the center, and that's okay. If you've never, for years, the cookbooks all told you, USDA told you, cook your pork chops to 170. Well, they finally lowered it to 160 and then to 145. And I'm here to tell you they're absolutely at their best at 140 to 135. 140 is a good number. Mildly pink. They're really tender and juicy. If you've never had a pork chop or a country rib grilled to 140, you've never had a pork chop. So you need to try that. They're really good that way. Okay, the other kind of ribs that are worth talking about are beef ribs. And they're similar. The animal, his rib structure is similar to our rib structure. You have the back ribs, which have the longissimus dorsi attached. And that longissimus dorsi is the rib eye, or the rib roast, same muscle. And it runs from the shoulder to the hip. Up near the shoulder, it's the rib roast or the rib eye. And then down further from the end of the rib cage to the hips, it's the strip steak, same muscle all the way. Really marvelous flavors. And the bones attached, if you buy a bone-in rib roast, those bones are back ribs, similar to pork back ribs. Again, a curved bone. And if you want, you can buy a rib roast. It's very expensive, but you can cut the bones out and you can leave more meat on top. But in general, because the rib roast meat is so expensive and so highly priced, when you buy back ribs or you buy a boneless rib roast, they have cut that meat pretty close to the bone. Let's get another picture up here. Uh, I'm improvising here, folks. Let's get there we go. My photo sharing site. There we go. I'm coming up. Okay, let's get screen sharing going. All right, what you're looking at is a gallery of photographs for my next book, I should tell you, the book was scheduled to come out, years ago. And the last date that I shared was spring 24. I'm still fussing with it, and we've pushed the deadline, the pub date back to spring 25. I'm sorry to those of you who have been waiting anxiously, but it won't be out till spring 25 while I'm still fussing with it. One of the things I'm fussing with is the photography. This is some of the photography here. I'm very proud of the photography. I've been working very hard on it. I'm not quite sure how much of it you can see, but here's some of the photographs. And that is beef back ribs. Typically, it's got 7 bones, and you can see they've cut the meat very close to the bone. So after it's roasted for several hours, you'll get bones, what we call shiners, sticking out. But I don't know if you can see all of this. I don't know how much of this screen sharing shows, but ain't that beautiful? While we're at it, here's some more of the pictures from the book. I've been really working hard on my photography and Photoshop. And now I'm just showing off. Okay, enough of that. So, beef ribs. Now, the back ribs, you just saw a picture of them. Not a lot of meat on them. But the side ribs, particularly towards the front of the animal, often come in a 4-bone slab. And the meat on them can be 2 inches thick. And if you go to Texas, you'll see restaurants serving them, and they're fantastic. And so what you want to do is you want to ask your butcher for side ribs towards the front of the animal. They're often called plate ribs. And I have more about them on the website. There's actually a code number. I don't remember what it is. But if you go to AmazingRibs.com and look up beef ribs, it'll give you the code number. So you can make sure you tell the butcher the code number. You'll get exactly what you want. They don't always have them in stock, but they're really fantastic. They're often called dino ribs in Texas because they look like they're from a dinosaur. The bones are really big and really thick. Think 2 inches of meat on there. And it's very much like brisket. Very tender, very juicy, very fatty, succulent, spectacular. And they're a lot of fun. Most folks don't do them because you got to usually special order them. Thank you, by the way, Cool J77 and Larry Wheeler. You're saying nice, and Mark Nagy and Dan. Oh my goodness, several of you were saying nice things about the photography. I actually did my master's in photography at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is where Leroy Neiman went, and a lot of other great artists. They're done for an interesting process. I have a studio in my basement, and I turn out all the lights. It's done in total darkness. and I illuminate the food with a pen light. It's about the size of a pen. And I have to move it, scan it across the food, holding it longer where I want it more light, less where I want less light. And often I have to do 4 or 5 exposures, sometimes 10, 20 seconds long. And then they're sandwiched together in Photoshop. So it's a very arduous process, but it makes really striking, rich photographs, very painterly. It's a very arduous process, but I really wanted the photography to be beautiful for this next book. And that's one of the things that's holding it up. I'm really working hard on the photography. So in any case, those are beef ribs. Now, you can get lamb ribs. And Jack Stack restaurant in Kansas City is famous for their lamb ribs. I'm just not a big fan. Now, I absolutely adore lamb. I'll take a rack of lamb, and if you give me a rack of lamb or a ribeye steak, I'll die of starvation trying to decide which one to eat first. But the rack of lamb is the same thing as a ribeye. It's made from the longissimus dorsi with the lamb bones underneath, the curved backbones. The problem is there's on a lamb, there's not much meat on the bones. It's more fat than it is meat. And lamb fat isn't as wonderful tasting as pork fat or beef fat even. So I'm not a big fan. When it comes to lamb ribs, I want a rack of lamb, which is lamb rib bones with the longissimus dorsi attached, and most of the fat scraped off the top end, so it looks like a lollipop. And that's just absolutely marvelous. It's so tender and so juicy. So that's my overview of the rib options coming up. I think I've rambled on long enough. Let's have some questions. Let me scroll up to the top of your posts here. I can see posts from both Facebook and YouTube. So let's see if we got any questions, either about ribs or whatever else you want. Hit me. By the way, I just got the new Traeger Timberline pellet smoker in. Sells for like $1 million. I don't know, $3,500. I forget how much they sell for. They sent me a sample to play with. Oh my, what a nice machine. And first of all, it's drop dead gorgeous. If you're in the market for a pellet smoker, and there's a lot to be said for them, I love them. The beauty of being able to set it and forget it, and maybe even control it remotely. But I am not yet. Maybe I'm just an old fogey, but I'm not yet. I don't feel the need to be able to control it remotely. If I want to watch the game or mow the lawn, it's nice to be able to see what the temperature is inside the smoker. But frankly, I'd rather go to the smoker with a handheld thermometer, open the lid and take a look in there and make sure everything's doing fine. Make sure something hasn't collapsed or caught fire, and then, poke it in a few different places instead of one, and poke it with my finger and sniff it. Maybe if nobody's looking, take a little cut off of there and taste it. The new models like this Traeger, Timberline, and all the others, they're all Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled. And brother, did I have a rough time getting this thing to talk to my Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And Max Good, who works with full-time testing grills and smokers, is constantly complaining about getting them to pair with the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth. So you might consider, if you're looking for a pellet smoker, getting something just simple, stripped down, where you got to control it manually. But most of them now come with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connected. Okay. Sawatowski said, that's why your pictures look like. Hey, guy, they don't look like junk. Our Pitmaster Club, we have a section there called Show Us What You're Cooking, and the members post pictures, almost all of them taken with mobile phones. Oh my, they are just flat magazine quality, gorgeous. If you've seen the newsletter, we put out for the Pitmaster Club, these folks are just taking spectacular images just with the smartphones. They're really good cameras. The quality of these things has really gone up. Okay. Mark Maggie is saying using a paper towel to put. We were talking earlier about getting the membrane off. A paper towel helps. You loosen it maybe with a butter knife and get a grip on it. And I use a paper towel. He's right, and it helps me hold it better. It's not as slippery, and it's easier to pull it off of so that's a good technique. Mark is asking, I've cooked on the Franklin smoker. No, I haven't, but I've seen it. I've touched one. Actually, I was doing a presentation and a book signing at the barbecue store in Milwaukee this weekend. And hold on one second. Let me just make this phone call go away. The Franklin was there, and they're really expensive, well over $5,000. It is the nicest offset smoker I've seen. It's a stick burner. It burns logs, doesn't burn pellets. You can use charcoal in it, but it's designed to burn logs. And it's the nicest one, the best design, the most sturdy and beautifully crafted that I've seen. But burning logs is very tricky. It requires a great deal of skill. You start the logs. Often you start them with charcoal. You put down a bed of charcoal on the offset in the firebox and get that going. And then you lay the logs on top, and they burn down to embers. And you feed it one log at a time. And getting the temperature balance is tricky. On a pellet smoker, you just set the dial. It gets tricky. And, of course, you need more fuel on a cold day than on a warm day. You control temperature also by oxygen. So you've got vents that you open and close, both on the intake side and on the chimney side, the exhaust side. And so you've got to, it's really an art. It's really an art cooking with an offset and getting it right. And this is designed to help you get it right. It's really well designed. But by golly, it's awfully expensive. And it weighs a ton. I mean, it's just really solid, heavy metal. But I was very impressed with it, and I can see how it would be to cook. Hello, Kevin. Good to see you back. Hello, Rich. Rich Conley, who's a regular. He says, seeing what the temperature really is with something like the ThermoWorks signals is important to me. Bluetooth or Wi-Fi hookup pairing at fast and foolproof. Don't care if I can't control temperature. I'm not quite sure I'm following your commentary, but you can trust the thermostat controls on those pellet smokers. Larry Gonzalez is asking, is it better to smoke the rib tips cut first or the slab? The rib tips will cook faster. They'll cook in about half the time. So if you throw them on early, then you bring them in and chop them up like that guy with the cleaver I showed the movie of, and you can serve those as snacks or chef's treat, while you're cooking, you can gnaw on them. but they'll cook much faster because they're thinner. Cooking time, remember this is really crucial. Cooking time depends on thickness, not weight. If you read a lot of recipes that say cook it for X number of minutes per pound, that's wrong. It's per thickness. Rhodes Davis just came back from Japan. I went there years ago. My wife was a scientist, or is a scientist. She retired just recently. And she spoke at a conference in Japan. And I went along and took the wives tour. That's what they called it in those days, the wives tour. There were 2 men on a busload of women. But we had a blast. It was just fantastic. Japan is just this most remarkable country and society. The nicest, most gentle and friendly and helpful people you'll ever encounter. And they worship food. Food is not just something that fills you up. Everything they make, every meal they cook is a really religious ritual. And we took a cooking class there from a woman whom people referred to as the Julia Child of Japan. And of course, we were the only Americans in the class. All the rest of the students were young women getting ready to get married. And there was just a lot of giggling to have a bearded white guy in the class. And it was just, everything just worked so beautifully. If you're ever thinking about an overseas trip, I absolutely adore Europe and Italy and France and Spain. But Japan is an out-of-body experience. Good on you. I hope you had a great time. Okay, he's asking if I have ideas for Japanese-inspired taste of pork loin. Japanese and Chinese ingredients are very similar, Asian ingredients. Pork loin or pork tenderloin, which is more tender and more juicy. There's a recipe on AmazingRibs.com for sweet sour pork tenderloin. Now sweet sour pork is classically Cantonese or American, but this is uses Asian ingredients. Basically, you take the loin or the tenderloin and you cut it into long, skinny strips, grill them, cut them into chunks. Grill some pineapple, grill some green pepper, and then mix them together with an Asian sweet sour sauce, and that's just a classic Zen combo of sweetness and acidity, vinegar and sugar, and delightful. And everybody loves sweet sour pork. So go look at that and see if that tickles your fancy. Asian flavors and ingredients are just a lot of fun, and I have some of those recipes in my new book. Barbecue Mike is asking, is a prolonged internal temperature of 160 ideal for rendering fat and also connective tissue? And 160 is a good number for rendering fat and connective tissue. Yes, it's going to, it depends on what cut. If you're talking ribs, that's a good temperature. I usually take it up a little higher. But if you're thinking, Mike, about sous vide, that's a real good number for sous vide. And it will be very, very tender. If you're talking about grilling it, that you're going to end up a little dry at that temperature. Mark Nagy says, if the bank job is a go, I'd love to get one. I think he's talking about the Franklin. And I'm not sure if the bank job means his new job at a bank or he and his buddies are knocking off a bank. I think he's talking about the latter. Yeah, knock off a bank, then buy one. Kevin Cieslak is asking a really interesting one. What flavor pellets do I like for pork ribs? Any flavor. It really just doesn't matter much. There's just not a big difference in the flavors. Once you combust pellets, they burn. there's not a huge difference in flavor. You can often smell the difference. Now, some flavors like mesquite and hickory can be stronger, but remember, you have the flavor of the pork, you have the flavor of salt, you have the flavor of the rubs, you have the flavor of the smoke, you have the temperature you're cooking at and how it interacts with the meat, you have the sauce. All of those combine like the instruments in an orchestra. The flavor of the pellets is just one instrument in the orchestra, and it's a minor one, especially the dominant flavor is the sauce. If you're using sauce, it's going to cover over most idiosyncrasies. And then you have different brands of pellets. You have some pellets that are flavored with an additive, others that are 50% of the wood. Almost all pellets are 50% oak or roughly around that range, because oak is inexpensive and it's also feeds well in the machine. So if it says it's cherry, its chances are it's somewhere like 50% oak and 50% cherry. So it's not all cherry. So I just don't worry about that. I do standardize. For me, I just buy apple. That's my standard. I just don't think that varying the pellets makes a significant difference. I don't compete, so I'm not fighting for a fraction of quality. I don't worry about it. I like apple. It's pretty good with just about everything, and I don't obsess over the wood. And I have a big article about this because, is it, what percentage of it is wood? I don't know if Traeger is still making their pellets with an extract flavor additive. It's just, not worth worrying about. Larry Wheeler's asking if I was forced to cook ribs on a small, like 2-foot-high box electric smoker, which cut would you choose? Well, my favorite still remains the side ribs or the St. Louis cut, because they're most flavorful because of all the fat. But electric smokers in general are inferior to all the others, if you can avoid it. It sounds like you're going to somebody's house and this is all you've got access to. Then do the best you can. The problem with electric smokers is there's no combustion. In a charcoal smoker, your charcoal is combusting. In a pellet smoker, your pellets are combusting. On a offset smoker, your logs are combusting. During combustion, gases are emitted from the wood or the charcoal, and those gases are full of flavoring compounds. In an electric, there's no combustion. You put wood in there, but it smolders. And the flavor of smoldering wood is different than the flavor of combusting wood. And by the way, you want your wood to combust. You want it to catch on fire. You don't want it to smolder. A lot of people say, well, I put my wood chips in an aluminum packet and I throw it on my gas grill, and it makes a lot of smoke that way. It's smoldering. The best tasting wood is when the wood actually catches fire. If you're cooking on a gas grill, use chunks of wood. Buy logs and cut them into chunks the size of golf balls or baseballs, and let them catch on fire. The flavor of the smoke of burning wood is better than the flavor of smoldering wood. David Maxey, interesting question. Is there a way to look for quality pork ribs like you look for marbling with beef? Yeah, I mean, you can look at the slabs and you can kind of try to see which ones have the most meat and what the ratio of fat is. And of course, big globs of fat are not as good as marbled fat. But if you have the luxury, you can look for these new old heritage varieties. For example, Berkshire pork is a old variety that has been gaining popularity, and it has a better flavor than your standard commodity pork that you buy in the grocery store. And I'm seeing more of it. Duroc, Duroc. Berkshire and Duroc are two of the so-called heritage hogs that are gaining in popularity and distribution. Mangalista, red wattle. There's a whole variety of them. If you can get your hands on them, you might have to. Now, if you really want to have some fun and spend some money, you can special order them over the internet. They'll come frozen, but they have really distinctive flavor. They're really good, really juicy. Griddle and Vittles with Nick and Jay asking if I'm going to be at the Griddle Battle in Southern Illinois. It's the first griddle competition, and I have a conflict. There's a graduation party that I have to go to, and I can't be there, but we're sponsoring it. I sent them a check, and our name should be on the prize, and I'll be there. I think it's fantastic. You know, griddling has really caught on. Some of the first griddles were out there for $200-300. Traeger now has a very fancy, expensive one with all the bells and whistles. But basically, it's just a flat top griddle. Now, for years, when I wanted a griddle, I have this cast iron griddle that's maybe 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, and I just throw it on my gas grill. And I've been doing salmon on that and grilled cheese sandwiches for years. But you can now buy standalone griddles. Even Weber is making one now. And they're like, you know, at Moe's Diner, they're big, huge, flat, either cast iron or steel of varying sorts. And, I mean, you can do everything. I mean, you know, eggs, pancakes, bacon, Philly cheesesteaks, and you can have this smash burgers. You can get like 50 smash burgers on these things. So it's really catching on, and I'm going to be really interested to hear how it goes down there, Nick and Jay. And if you come back to this one next month, let me know how it went. Cool J77 is asking a really interesting question. Many people are buying offset smokers with 3/8 inch thick walls. I don't see an advantage to the extra weight. Would I take a moment to discuss metal thickness? You're on to something there, pal. For years, we've been saying you want thick metal on these offsets to retain heat. But it's the air, and it's moving through there. And there's Bill Carew, who built my favorite wood-burning, log-burning smoker, the Carew BBQ, which is not an offset. I talked to him, and he made a really strong case that it just doesn't matter how thick that metal is. It will help stabilize temperature, but a lot is made over getting really heavyweight, thick metal, and it may be not that necessary. I forget exactly all of his arguments. I'll have to check my notes on that. But he made a very profound and cogent argument that it just doesn't matter. I do think, though, that all these cheap offsets that the hardware stores are selling, they leak. They got a lot of air leakage around the door and such. That, I think, may be a problem. But yeah, like the Franklin, it's really heavy. It's thick. Okay, let's see if I can figure this one out. Ryan Leal is asking, when I've tried cooking meat at the same temperature in my oven, I presume he's talking indoor oven, and in the same way as I do in my smoker, the stuff out of the oven doesn't look or taste even close to as good, even if I just use straight charcoal. Why is that? You mean just use straight charcoal outdoors? Well, among other things, there's a lot of airflow moving through your outdoor grills and smokers. Remember, the fuel requires oxygen. You got to have wood or charcoal or gas mixing with oxygen. And there's just a massive amount of air moving through those things. And that's what makes your bark. Your indoor oven, now, depending on whether it's gas, where there is combustion, or electric, where there is no combustion, is going to be different. If it's gas, there's combustion, but the product of that combustion is mostly carbon dioxide and water. Whereas outdoors, if you're throwing wood on there, you're getting all these complicated combustion gases, which are full of flavor. So I think airflow is a major difference. And if it's gas or charcoal, you're just not getting any of those flavors that you're getting from outdoors, even from straight charcoal. And straight charcoal does not produce a lot of flavor. Charcoal is primarily for heat, but it does make some flavor. So, yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference. And also, if you're cooking outdoors, you have the option of moving directly over infrared energy, directly over heat. And in your indoor oven, it's strictly convection airflow. So there's some differences going on, yeah. It may seem subtle, but they're significant. Chris Sawatowski. I'm not knocking the new technology, says Chris, but I can pretty much tell you what the temperature of my meat will be by the temp and time. It's all about learning your smoker. Sometimes old school is best. Very satisfying. Yeah, but it took you years, Chris, to get there. Practice, practice, practice. And you probably have been working with the same cooker for years. And maybe you're in a temperate climate where you don't have snow or freezing wind and all those other variables. And maybe you cook more often than most of us do, which is, once or twice a week. So it takes practice. If I cooked on nothing but an offset smoker, I'd get pretty good at it. But I cook on everything. And a lot of folks don't have that luxury. You probably have achieved a level of artistry, of craftsmanship above and beyond most of us. So for most of us, having a thermostat is really convenient, really helpful. It's not easy to know exactly how much wood to use or how much charcoal to use, to get to a certain temperature without thermometers, and then having tasted the outcome from many cooks. Kevin Liddell is asking if I've done a recent side-by-side comparison of wireless smart thermometers. I don't. I do have. I have the one that the meter. I have the Fireboard, and what is that thing? The Pistachio. So I have 3 of them. I've been fiddling with them, I haven't really. We have a thermometer tester on AmazingRibs.com, Bill McGrath. He's an electrical engineer. and he's done deep dive testing. He's going to be your better voice than me. So I would go to AmazingRibs.com, and if you're looking at them, read his reviews, because he's got special equipment that he uses to measure how accurate they are, how long they take to get to the temperature. But I've just started using the meter on this new Traeger that I've got, because Traeger bought the meter company. And it's pretty impressive. It works pretty well. All three of them have really fat probes. Now I'm waiting for another one that's just come out, and that's called Combustion Inc. And it's a skinnier probe, and it has 8 sensors in it. So it senses in the center and on the edge and in between. And it's supposed to be very good at predictive. He said he'd send me a sample. I haven't got it yet. But he is really smart. Chris Young. He's one of the guys who was on the team that invented the sous vide machine, the Joule. And also he was among the authors for the Modernist Cuisine book series. So he's really quite smart. So my gut instinct is this new Combustion Inc. device is going to be really good. And it's wireless. Any reason why Amazing Ribs to date hasn't rated any Members Mark grills and griddles? Max Good is our grill tester, and he's one guy, and we demand him to be thorough. And his rate of testing is about 12 to 16 or more devices a year. Now, we've started asking some other members of our team to do some testing, but they don't have all the tools that he has or the expertise that he has. And so we tend to focus on products that we know are popular and big in the marketplace. I think Members Mark is a private label from one of the big box stores. I don't shop at the big box stores, so I don't remember which ones they are. Chances are that's one of the reasons why he hasn't bought one. He's been focusing on the big brands, the Webers and the others that are everywhere. So we might get around to it. I don't tell him what to do. I let him decide, and he's really good at it. And we just can't test them all. We are the only website out there that has a full-time grill and smoker tester. There's a bunch of folks who dabble with it, but they're informal. They fire it up and they cook a few meals and they write a review. That's not the way we work. Mark Nagy, a really interesting question. My thoughts on yellow mustard smear before the rub. If you want mustard flavor, you're not going to get it by smearing mustard on the meat. Mustard in a jar is a small amount of mustard powder mixed with either water or wine or vinegar. If you want mustard flavor, go get a jar of Coleman's mustard powder and sprinkle it on. That's going to give you a lot of mustard flavor. What people use the smear for, mustard, or some use ketchup. Clint Cantwell, championship competitor, who's my general manager, he likes mayonnaise because it's mostly fat. The real purpose of these smears before you put on the rub is they help hold the rub on. If you sprinkle rub on, a lot of it falls off. But, not that much. Meat is 75% water. I'll tell you what I do. If I'm doing ribs, I put my hands under the faucet, get my hands wet, and I pat the surface of the ribs so that there's a little water on it. And then I sprinkle the rub on there. The mustard doesn't add any flavor. I've tested this side by side. It's just a way to glue the rub on. So if you want to use mustard to glue the rub on, go for it. If you want to use mayonnaise, which is more fat, go for it. I just use a little light, thin layer of water. Kevin saying don't exceed 158 for meat proteins in sous vide. Don't know how you got to that number, but that's around the right number. You know, that's one of the problems with sous vide. There's a lot of wizardry involved, and every sous vide chef has their magic number. On our meat temperature guide, where is it? We have, oh, there it is. We have a pretty exhaustive meat temperature guide here. You can get these on Amazon for $10, or if you join our Pitmaster Club, you get it free. It's a magnet, and there's a column here of sous vide temperatures, and we call it the rules of thumb, and I think that's the way to approach it. These times and temps are starting points that will produce meats that please experiment. So I think if I were you, Kevin, I would say 158 for meat proteins is a good starting point, rather than be pedantic about saying don't exceed 158. Maybe there's a reason for saying that. I don't know. But I think that some meats might like more. I mean, we just talked about 160 a minute ago. Larry Gonzalez saying thank you. You're welcome, Larry. I enjoy doing this. Yeah, Chris Sawatowski says he's tried mayonnaise and didn't notice any difference. I don't think it adds much flavor. Now, I do like mayonnaise on fish when I'm grilling it because it's mostly fat, and fish is just a pain in the ass. It just wants to stick to anything metal. And you know, if you're grilling fish, how difficult it is to get it to let go of the grill grates. Putting mayonnaise on fish seems to help it release. And it doesn't flavor it. It melts off, disappears, no flavor. And Ryan Hoogland, 2.5 weeks until the griddle battle. Ryan, I think you just arrived. We were just talking about it. Okay, DJ is saying short ribs seem to be best at low and slow. But what about Korean-style ribs where they're cooked hot and high with short cooks? Can you talk about short ribs cooked hot and high? All right, in general, when you're cooking hot and fast, in general, meat fibers shrink when they're subjected to high heat. I mean, that's pretty much a given. So the higher the temperature, the more shrinkage you get. When they shrink, what happens? They squeeze out moisture. So hot and fast is good for something thin, but for a thick piece of meat like short ribs, hot and fast could end up with dry meat. Now, Korean short ribs are often marinated, and they're cut thin, and the marinade does get in a little bit. We've got a lot going on here. Thickness of the meat, I was talking about earlier, really is a very important thing. And marinades don't penetrate more than 1/16 of an eighth of an inch. But if you cut it into a 1/4-inch strip, 1/16 of an inch on either side is 1/8 of an inch total, which is half of a 1/4 inch thick. So you have a pretty substantial piece of meat with marinade in it. If it's a whole short rib, which is 2 inches thick, 1/16 of an inch on either side is negligible. Ryan, we're on both Facebook and YouTube. Sometimes I do Twitch and LinkedIn, but I had troubles hooking up to LinkedIn tonight. Lou George is asking, what do I think about the Goldie's method to cook brisket? Cook uncovered until 195, 10 to 12 hours, then cover in tallow. Wrap in foil and rest in an oven at 140 for at least 12 hours until you serve it. Gosh, there's all kinds of method. I've never heard of the Goldie's method. Um, uh, um, tallow is fat. Meat is water. Brisket is about 75% water. Oil and water don't mix. So if you coat brisket with tallow, you've put an impervious coat on the outside. That tallow cannot penetrate the meat. Not on this planet. It's fat, and it won't get into the meat under any circumstances. No way. So what you've done is you've wrapped the meat in an impervious cover, analogous to wrapping it in foil. Now, what it can do is help hold in moisture, because moisture can't get out very easily. It may find cracks in the tallow and seep out that way. So it won't dry out as easily. And the same thing happens when you wrap it in foil. So in theory, I don't see a huge difference. I haven't tried this technique, nor have I tasted anybody cooking at it. I can see where, there may be some interesting aspects to it, because it's likely to trap more moisture. But you're not going to get a bark. That tallow is going to prevent any bark formation. Bark is the surface of the meat that has dehydrated. When you're cooking meat, like brisket, moisture evaporates and it drips off. And there's a phenomenon that's called the stall. And anybody who's cooked pork shoulder or brisket knows about the stall. Depending on the temperature you're cooking at, usually it's in the 225 to 275 range, the temperature will go up and then it'll stop going up. And it stops going up because the moisture is evaporating from the surface at the same rate that the warm air is warming the meat. So it reaches stasis, and it won't continue to go up until the moisture evaporates from the surface and the surface gets dry. And that's the bark. And a lot of people really like the bark. On ribs, they can be crunchy. On pulled pork, oh my, it definitely can be crunchy. So if you've wrapped it in fat or foil or butcher paper, you're preventing the surface from drying out. So you're not going to have any bark. And I like bark. Bark is essentially jerky. It's dried meat. Yep, we got barbecue, Blackstone, and beer. Okay, we are well represented by the griddle cook-offs. I think, Ryan, is that you showing up on two platforms, or with two names? We were talking earlier, but you arrived late, Big Shot, about your event. And somebody else is here asking if I'm going to be there, and I can't be. But we were talking about griddles, and this is the hottest thing going in barbecue now, in outdoor cooking. Everybody is raving about griddle cooking and how much fun it is. And Ryan and are running this barbecue, Blackstone, and beer event. I forget what township it is in. So, guys, tell me where this event is. It's in downstate Illinois. But it is the first that I know of griddle cook-off. And as I mentioned, we're sponsoring it, or part of it. Jason Hoffman, hello from Bentonville, Arkansas. I have been to Bentonville. You guys have the most extraordinary art museum. I forget the name of it, but it is, I think, funded by the people from Sam's Club. That's where the Sam's Club headquarters is. Aha, okay. Sam's Club private label is Maker's Mark. We were asked earlier if we had reviewed Maker's Mark, and I knew it was a private label from one of the big box stores. So it's from it's Sam's Club. But Bentonville is where Sam's Club is based. And this museum, oh God, I wish I could remember. It's mostly American art, and the museum itself is gorgeous, and the collection is breathtaking. I really was impressed. Really fell in love with it. And it's a little town, but there's a pretty nice restaurant clutch downtown, and I had a couple of really good meals. Frank Olson's asking if I've seen the indoor smoker called the Arden. A company called First Build has a model they are bringing to market. You should get your hands on one. Would love to read your review. I'm trying to visualize what an indoor smoker is like, because in general, smokers and smoke alarms don't get along. In general, if you're creating smoke indoors, you better have a darn good exhaust fan. I don't. Now, there's a lot of ovens, stovetops, that have grills with a downdraft exhaust system. I don't know how this smoker would work. I'll try to find out what I can about it. We do not review products that are still in development. We review products that are on the store shelves. We don't have time to review everything, so we don't waste time on things that are not finished. Mark, thank you very nice. Those are kind words. Another spam call. 177-1212. You know, I'll tell you, I never talk about politics. I stick to cooking, but I'm going to break the rule briefly. If our lawmakers wanted to do something that benefited us all, they would find a way to put an end to that crap. Now, my business is in my home, as you can see. I have an office. And I get more than a dozen of these a day. And here they are interrupting a broadcast. I don't know how law firms and other companies survive, because they must just they must have someone answering the phone. I don't know what they do about it. It would be nice if there was a way to get rid of this. Frank, if you if you can, send me a link to this countertop smoker. I'm Meathead at AmazingRibs.com. Yeah, Rhodes Davis is saying the stall is pit panic. Yeah, I mean, especially if you're new to smoking and you've heard that you're going to take it to 190 to 205, and you got your expensive new probe in your pork butt, and people are coming over to watch the game, and you're going to do pulled pork, and the temperature is creeping up, and it hits 150, 160, and boom, it stops. And it stays there for hours. That's the stall. And the way to beat the stall is to wrap it in foil. Because when you wrap it in foil or butcher paper, it can't cool from evaporation. It's called evaporative cooling. It's like when you're sweating, when you're cutting the lawn. When you cut the lawn, you sweat and it cools you. So if you wrap it in foil, you stop evaporative cooling, but you also prevent the drying out of the surface, which is bark formation. Okay, DJ's asking a really good question. I rarely smoke brisket. For me, it's usually only 2 to 6 people. Since flats are smaller, is it possible to get an excellent flat only? Any advice to massive leftover brisket? Okay, just let's do the basics first. Let me do a little screen share. Let's see if I can do another one here. Stand by. Okay, I'm going to do a screen share. Whoa. You know, and one of the things I can't tell folks is how big things are when I'm doing a screen share. I think that may have been too large. I really need to get another computer to see how they look. But this is a very simple schematic of what a brisket looks like. The brisket is the pectoral muscles, the chest muscles of the steer. Cattle don't have collarbones. On humans, the collarbones help, and animals, there's a collarbone that help bear the load. The brisket muscle, the pectoral muscles, help bear more than half the load of the animal. It's got the head, the neck, the shoulders, the front legs, and all the way back pretty much to the hips. All of that is borne by the brisket. And that diagram there could be 18 pounds or so. There's two muscles particularly, the pectoralis profunda and the pectoralis superficialis, better known as the flat and the point. The flat is, as you might think, it is very even and flat, and it's the stuff you make these marvelous slices from, like corned beef is made from brisket flat mostly. But if you take the two muscles apart, and that's what I do now when I cook brisket, I take the two muscles apart. The first time I did it, I was shocked to discover that the point, and this picture doesn't really display that properly. Let's see if this one is better. No. The point is about 3/4 to 2/3 the weight of the flat. So they're very similar in size. The point, unfortunately, is very jagged, but the point has more marbling, and it is always more juicy and more tender. It is the better of the two muscles. So if you can get the point instead of the flat, you're not going to get such beautiful, even slices, but it's going to be juicier and more flavorful. And it'll be smaller. So that may be your solution. Now, most butchers don't carry a lot of brisket. There's, and if they do, they carry small hunks. And often it has both point and flat with a big, thick fat layer in between. So you may just need to get a hold of the head butcher at your grocery store or your supermarket, or if you know of a real butcher, and get to know them and ask them, can you get me brisket point? And if you can, that's what you want to cook. And if it's still too big for your two parties, then cut it in half and freeze half. But don't forget, there's often a lot of fat on top, and you want to get rid of it. Like the guy who was talking about swathing it in thick layers of fat. It can't penetrate. Get it off. So that may be, Jason is saying, I'm jumping around here. Crystal Bridge is the name of the art museum. He says it's only a mile from your house, from his house. Oh my, I'm going to come stay with you. Walk there every morning. Oh my. What a beautiful setting, too, it is, with river and lake there. Gorgeous. Crystal Bridges. If you're ever traveling through that neighborhood of Arkansas and you have an interest in art, you need to go to the Crystal. It's one of America's great art museums, and I've been to as many as you can imagine. I did my master's in art, and I have more than a passing interest in art. Okay, Cool J is saying Goldie's wraps with tallow during the holding phase. The bark would already be formed. I think the tallow gives the brisket sheen for presentation purpose at the restaurant. I'm still getting disconnect here, pal. Bark is dried meat. It's jerky. It's crunchy. You coat it with tallow, which is fat, and moisture from below is going to make the bark soft. I'm sorry, I just can't imagine a really good bark. Now, it may be a nice kind of flavorful crust, but it's going to soften the bark. It's just going to soften the bark. A sheen, well, I mean, if you want a sheen, then you take tallow, melt it in a saucepan, get a brush, and paint it on. That works just fine. I've done that with steak. In fact, with some steaks, I've taken aged, dry-aged steak fat, which I've trimmed off. And the flavor of dry aging is often the flavor of the change of the fat. Melted that and painted it on a steak, and the steak comes out tasting like a dry-aged steak. So again, I don't know who this Goldie's is. Is that a restaurant? And I don't know this technique. And if you've seen it written about, I'd love to read more about it. It just sounds like it's from Mars. I don't know what it is or how they're doing it or why. And I don't know of anybody else doing it. So I'm wondering. DJ says, I wish I could only find a point. Flats are everywhere. Well, I mean, if you see flats, there got to be points somewhere. Getting to know your butcher is better than getting to know your stockbroker. Get to know your butcher and ask them if they can special order anything you want. Usually, if they're any good, they can reach out to the wholesalers or even the slaughterhouses and say, I want the left half of the right toe, and you'll get it. You may pay for it, but if you get to know your butcher, if they want your business, if they want to help, if they want to be cooperative, and you tell them, I would like brisket point, can you order it? They should say, yeah, I can order it. It may take a week or two, but I can get it in. And if they say no, forget it, then it's time to go look for another butcher. Okay. Well, I think we've gotten to the bottom here, and we've been at it for 90 minutes, almost exactly, and that's usually what I shoot for. And I'm an early to bed, early to rise guy, and I have a full day ahead of me tomorrow. So I'm going to take one last question from DJ. Optimum internal temperature for baked potato. You betcha. 208 to 210. That's when they're most tender and most fluffy. And look at that number for a second. 212 is the boiling point. So you're going to take it right up to the next to the boiling point. You can take it down to 205 or 200, and it's a little crunchier if you like a little crunchy. So, all right, Ted is... okay, so Ted Shanine is saying Golden's, not Goldie's, is the 2023 #1 barbecue restaurant in Texas monthly. Well, that's interesting because I know the people that do that rating very well. In fact, I have ridden along with them on their ratings, and I will reach out to Daniel Vaughn, who is in charge, and see if he can enlighten me as to what they're doing. That's interesting. Golden's, not Goldie's. And I'll see what I can learn about this process. All right, everybody. Thanks very much for hanging out with me. And I'll be back on the last Thursday of next month, barring mishap. And I have no idea what we'll talk about, but I appreciate your time and your attention. And I wish you well. And if you are looking for more information, a lot of what we talked about is on AmazingRibs.com or in my book, which is the #1 best-selling barbecue book on the market today. And If you're really deep into it, I encourage you to take the 30-day free trial. In our Pitmaster Club, there's a lot of cool people in there and a lot of great info. And they've probably been the Goldens. Okay? All right. Yeah, Cool J is saying Goldee's is the number one in Texas Monthly. All right. Well, thank you very much. And we'll see you later.